Project.
Welcome back everyone, it's Mags, and have you ever thought to yourself, man, I love mystery dungeon games, but they're just not batshit insane enough? Well, someone did in 2010 because that's when Nippon Ichi Software released Zettai Hero Project, the Unlosing Ranger vs Darkdeath Evilman for the PSP. Yes, that is the full unapologetic title, it's glorious. For anyone familiar with NIS's RPGs around this time, you'll know that batshit insanity is their bread and butter. I swear I'm employed. These games are defined not only by their generally lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek atmosphere, but also their rather experimental mechanics and the ability to learn those mechanics well enough to break the game in half. For those inclined to take them on, these games survive well past the main story. One could even say that the main story is but a prelude to the actual game, depending on where your priorities lie. With enough grinding and clever use of the tools at your disposal, you can pump your numbers up to the tens of millions, and that's exactly what Z.H.P requires you to do. For reference, these are the stats of the final boss of Z.H.P's main story. These are the stats of the actual strongest boss in the game. Maddening doesn't begin to describe it. Z.H.P takes after the tokusatsu style. You know, those cheesy superhero shows that rely on practical effects. Yes, you can say it, like Power Rangers. God fucking damn it. It focuses on the epic battle between Pirihiko Ichimonji, also known as the absolute hero Unlosing Ranger, and Darkdeath Evilman, who has come to kidnap the super baby and destroy the world. Just go with it. At least the game would have you believe it focuses on Pirihiko, but on his way to confront the great Darkdeath, he gets hit by a car and fucking dies. Luckily for the fate of the world, this random bystander happened to be nearby. This is you. With his dying breath, Pirihiko passes on the mantle of Unlosing Ranger and says, "Go, fight Darkdeath in my stead." Needless to say, you get absolutely wiped. But the super baby and the ghost of Pirihiko are on your side. Can you tell this doesn't take itself seriously? With their help, you train your hardest on a special planet known as Bizarro Earth to help the citizens of real Earth overcome their fears and despair, while taking on Darkdeath again and again until you're strong enough to finally defeat him. It's a story of ultimate hope versus ultimate despair that has no right being as genuinely emotional and inspiring as it is. But hey, that's Toku for you. In the silent protagonist's never-ending quest for strength, you'll traverse through multi-floor dungeons in true mystery dungeon and roguelike fashion. Death sends you all the way back to the hub without any of the items or money you had with you, and you always start at level 1, but every level you earn in dungeons regardless gets added to your total level, which will make you stronger over time. You'll be using equipment and weapons you find to modify your stats, abilities, and appearance. Look at this dumb motherfucker. You need to keep your energy up with food, illegally modify your body like a true hero by playing the world's hardest game of flow, and slowly drown yourself in the looming sense of inadequacy that comes with how much goddamn time you're wasting. 200 floors! So how about we take a nice deep dive into the 100% experience of Z.H.P. First things first, let me shout out perhaps the most legendary man to ever walk the earth, Zarugas03, who seems to be the only person in existence who's made an in-depth guide on this game in English. And oh boy, is this in-depth. His work was astronomically helpful for me going through this game for the first time, and by extension, this video. So I'll leave links in the description. It's also important to note that this game has since been ported to PC and Switch with a ton of cut content, and only one of all those platforms has any external achievements to speak of, because, you know, why would you play a game for the actual game? That's insanity. So we're looking at the PC version, which cut 16 short extra dungeons that were in the original because they were all based on licensed IPs by Dengenki Bunko, whose license was presumably never renewed. Oops. This actually makes the game harder since some of those dungeons were good to grind in, and because no one cared enough about this game to highlight any of the consequences of this change in the modern ports, so let me be the one to do that when we get there. The basic mechanics of Z.H.P are simple. Enemies move when you do, find items in dungeons, clear all the floors, start at level 1 every time. The big thing to watch out for is really the energy or hunger meter. When you have any of it left, you heal a small percentage of health each turn, which you'll come to rely on, but with every step or action you take, your energy goes down a bit. When it reaches 0, your health will start decreasing by a small percentage instead every turn. You also can't use special skills since the cost of those is energy. And energy can only be replenished with certain food items, with some exceptions here and there, like specific pieces of equipment being able to be eaten for energy, and the fact that normal healing items still also restore 5% of energy. Then there's your Unlosing meter. This is a mechanic in the game where getting hit or hitting enemies builds up your meter, and then you can boost a certain stat for a few turns in Unlosing mode. It might be tempting to go for an attack stat like SAT, but just do yourself a solid and pick speed. It gives you a ton of free turns so you can just keep attacking and moving, and is broken as hell. Speaking of stats, there are 6 main ones besides health and jump. Jump just determines how high you can climb elevation. There's a separate stat for short range attacks and long range attacks, or S and L, with an attack and defense stat for each. Then there's your normal hit and speed, which determine accuracy and evade chance respectively. Then there's your total level. Even though you start at level 1 each time you exit a dungeon, every level you get in a dungeon adds to your total level. And at certain total level thresholds, all of your base stats will permanently increase by a small amount. The thresholds for these get very sparse very fast, and it caps at plus 200 for each base stat at 70,000 total levels. Last thing before we really dig into the deeper mechanics. Z.H.P tries to prevent you from save scumming by overwriting your file, so if you die in a dungeon and lose everything, you might be tempted to just quit out of the game and reload your file. But even if you do that, you'll still have none of your items or money. Z.H.P just says, nah. This even happens if you just close the game. If you know you're gonna die, you might also be tempted to just close the game and then open it again, and you'll have everything. No, you won't. Because of this, especially because it takes like half a second to save in this game, I recommend always keeping at least one backup save at all times. That is to say, save in 2 different slots every time you save, so if you die in one, you can reload the other and then save over both again. I actually started keeping 2 backup saves because there were multiple times I forgot to save over the files again before proceeding and getting screwed over anyway. You don't have to worry about losing anything if you exit in a safe spot like the hub world or a caravan. To start off, I'll be going over everything in the hub world. This is where you have access to all the NPCs and facilities you can use, and by extension, all the mechanics that will get you to where you need to be. You can place up to 6 different facilities at a time for you to use in the hub or during dungeons. And let me tell you, 6 is not enough. You'll find yourself switching these out all the time. Each facility has 2 NPCs or employees running it, and for the most part, they both have a different function unique to the facility. You can only use the functions of facilities that are present in your base. If you take them off, you can't use them, even in dungeons. However, this is more for facilities that you use actively, such as calling in food items from the home or repairing an item with the blacksmith. Ones that change the overarching game in a passive way, such as the church raising enemy levels, can be removed with that effect still active, so there's some abuse to be had there. Note that for basically all of these facilities, their effectiveness is based on the stats of the employees placed there. I'll have a whole section about how that works, so for now, I'll just go over the general purpose and use of the facilities. Some of the facilities aren't too important, but a lot of them are, and they'll be where you do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of customization and stats. There are 2 main ones in this regard that will be your best friends: the blacksmith, where you can perform synthesis, and the dark clinic, where you can use the Shadowgram. First, the blacksmith, because that gives me an excuse to also talk about items in general. Items come in many different types, but among them are weapons and equipment, which can only be equipped in one of 5 specific slots on your character, that being the head, right arm, left arm, feet, or body. The exception to this are some general weapon types that can be equipped in either hand. Besides giving you a nice stat boost, each weapon or equipment piece has a specific special skill and or passive ability attached to it, such as centaur bodies giving you the passive Hungry Soul, which makes you deal more damage the less energy you have. All of your specials and passives will come directly from the equipment you have on. Sounds awesome, right? You can mix and match equipment to give yourself a custom build using these abilities. Problem is, each piece of equipment also has durability, which means you can only use it so much before it becomes totally useless. And I mean totally useless. The stat boosts are also affected by durability, so the worse the condition, the less potent the boost. When an equipment piece reaches 0 durability or condition, you can no longer use the special skill attached to it, and its passive effect is totally nullified. Weapons and arm pieces deteriorate from attacking, and the rest from getting hit. Durability can be restored with the blacksmith for money, or WP in this game, one of the two main functions this facility serves. In general, every weapon and equipment piece comes in 6 ranks. These aren't like your Disgaea ranks, I mean each individual piece has 6 different versions of itself, represented by these stars, each one stronger than the last. The rank is determined by which enemy drops the item. Any given enemy has specific equipment pieces it can drop, and enemies too each come in 6 different ranks with their own color schemes, so rank 6 enemies will drop rank 6 items. Enemies also get stronger by rank with higher base stats. In the main story, you'll only be seeing rank 1 to 2 enemies, and therefore equipment drops, whereas rank 6 enemies only appear late into the final post-game dungeon, the Absolute Hero dungeon. Equipment modifies your stats by a percentage of your base stats instead of a strict number, so the benefit you get from them really depends on how high your base stats are. But there are also ways to increase this percentage boost. That way is through synthesizing, the second main function of the good old blacksmith. The way this works is that you can select one item as your base, and then another to synthesize into it, keeping the base item and losing the other. You can only synthesize items of the exact same type, headpieces into headpieces, right arms into right arms, etc. With this, you can transfer specials and passives between equipment. If you want Hungry Soul from a centaur body, just synthesize the centaur body into the equipment you want it on as your base. But there's a point limit attached. Each ability costs a certain amount of points to keep on the resulting item, and you only have so many you can use depending on the rank of the item, so you're not always going to be able to transfer everything you want. The base item doesn't automatically keep everything it already had, by the way. That costs points as well, and you need to manually select everything you want to keep on the item every time you perform synthesis. And some things just straight up can't be transferred no matter what. Despite appearances, synthesizing doesn't directly increase the stat boost percentages. It actually increases the condition stat, which makes it last longer. The condition stat is then applied to the other percentage boosts, and if you play your cards right, you can synthesize an item with 694% condition, raising the default stat boost by times 6.94. I'll go over the exact method to that later and how condition is calculated when I go over the recommended equipment and how to go about synthesizing it. But rest assured, synthesis is your best friend for getting massive stat boosts. Suffice to say, the blacksmith is pretty important. But there's one other facility that's just as important. The Dark Clinic, because this is where you can use the Shadowgram, your other best friend. The Shadowgram is a kind of strategy board that lets you modify your body. Each of these blue tiles lets you implant a chip onto it, which raises one given base stat. You can only implant chips next to another chip, essentially building outwards. Chips are made from weapons and equipment pieces. Each piece has a designated chip stat it turns into, and when you place a chip, you lose that piece of equipment forever, with no way to convert the chip back. At first, you'll only have a few tiles to work with, but the more you raise your total level, the more you'll be able to unlock, until you have the entire grid available to you. You'll be able to unlock all the chip spaces at around 2700 total level. The effectiveness of chips depends on the rank of the equipment you're using with a 1-to-1 ratio, so chips from rank 6 equipment gives you +6 to that stat when placed. Needless to say, you can really pump up your stats this way when you start finding higher ranked items. Chips are not the only things you can place on the Shadowgram though. Arguably even more importantly, there are also mods, which remind me a lot of the evil symbols from Disgaea 4 if you want to think of them that way. These are big symbols that take up multiple tiles and have their own placement restrictions, and no matter what, can only be placed on top of chips. Chips that are covered up with a mod will have their effect nullified, so they won't be added to your stats anymore. They're still underneath though, so if you move or delete the mod, uncovering them, they'll be effective again. Some mods can only be placed on certain types of chips as well, which are all color-coded depending on the stat. So if you have a yellow mod, which corresponds to the long-range defense stat, not only do you need chips in that configuration, but all of those chips have to be long-range defense chips. Mods will give you passive boosts of all different varieties, some of which can be bought by the nurse employee in the Dark Clinic, but most can only be bought from the excavator in the Caravan, which I'll get to in a moment. There are a lot of useful ones, like experience boosters, life support, which heals you back to half health one time when you would otherwise die, yellow wallet, which despite what its vague description will have you believe, gives you some money for every enemy you kill depending on their max health, not yours, and the absorber, which makes your armor lose no condition if you don't take any damage from an attack. The mods you'll mostly be using for straight stat increases are mods that are tied to specific equipment, which increases the stat boost earned from equipping that type. I'll talk more about that when we get to endgame equipment stats. The last important thing about the Shadowgram are these little heart monuments scattered around the board. These are hero energy beacons, which are activated when you place a chip next to them. These shoot out hero energy beams that can only be traveled across chips. If you haven't caught on already, chips are required to do basically anything on the Shadowgram. An unchipped tile is essentially useless. The purpose of hero energy is to boost your mods. Most mods have an effect that will be intensified by each hero energy beam that goes into it, but the trick here is not just how many beams, it's how many tiles those beams have to travel across to get to the mod. The more tiles they travel, the greater the effect they give. Not to get too ahead of myself, but this is by far the most useful for, again, equipment booster mods. In the case of those and other percentage-based mods, each tile traveled translates to an additional 1% boost. This is when you'll want to use a liberal amount of changers, which you can buy from the nurse to place onto your Shadowgram to change the direction of hero energy beams on any tile, with no limit to how many you can place. So as you can imagine, you can snake the hell out of these beams to cover as much terrain as possible and max your stat boosts. You can even combine beams into one beam that has the effect of all beams in it, even further maximizing efficiency. This thing will make you feel like an engineer trying to be as effective as possible. So I know I said there were 2 big facilities, but that was mostly just for strengthening yourself. There's a third facility that is absolutely instrumental to your experience, and that is the Caravan. This facility lets you set specific floors in a dungeon for the Caravan to stop on. This can only be changed in the hub world, so you need to be sure you have your floors set the way you want before entering a dungeon. The Caravan will act as its own in-between floor after the floor you set it to. You can use a host of other facilities functions here one time each, and even save your game. And trust me, that last thing alone makes this thing's existence a lifesaver. However, if the employees are too weak relative to the enemies of the dungeon, they may not survive the trip and will be replaced with a gravestone instead, because they died. In other words, you gotta make your employees strong, which again is a whole nother thing I'll get to later. The employees that show up here are based on which facilities you have placed in the hub world, but setting Caravan floors is only half of its function. The second Caravan employee is the Excavator. The Excavator is crucial. Each time you enter a Caravan, the Excavator will have a random assortment of items, the rarity of which depends on the dungeon you're in and how deep you are into it. It can only find stuff in Mastery Caves, by the way. I'll get to the Mastery Caves later, but they're very long extra dungeons where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time. In lower floors, it'll just have a few equipment pieces, but as you get deeper and deeper, the stock becomes larger and it'll start selling mods for your Shadowgram alongside equipment. This is the only place to get any mods that the nurse in the Dark Clinic doesn't already sell, which is about 95% of them. For the most part, it is pure RNG. The most concrete thing I can tell you is that medium strength equipment boosters, or M plugs, don't start showing up until the mid-hero Mastery Cave, and larges in the Veteran Cave. Other than that, you can find basically any mod in any cave. Like the other NPCs here, you can only use the Excavator once, so if you back out of it, there's no way to get back in. But don't despair, there is one surefire way to beat the RNG, a strategy as old as video games themselves: save scumming. If you save in the Caravan before talking to the Excavator, its stock will be different each time you load the save. This comes in great handy when looking for specific mod parts, and oh trust me, you will be. The Blacksmith, Dark Clinic, and Caravan are without a doubt your most important facilities, but I'll quickly go over some other good ones too. The Home is where you can deposit money to increase your storage capacity and get food during dungeons. The money you deposit will slowly decrease over time, so it's a good idea to put in as much as you can when you can until you max out on storage space, which is a whopping 36 pages, and sometimes it still doesn't feel like enough. The other employee here doesn't do anything in the hub, but during actual dungeons you can call in a food item from it. If you let it drop really low, which funnily enough is an achievement, it's a weak one that only restores 5% of your energy, but quickly enough it'll bring 50% food, and finally, way above the cost of maxing out your storage, at a crisp 10 million WP deposited, it brings you 100% energy restoration food. There's yet another achievement marking this milestone, although it doesn't tell you that's what it actually does. The Church lets you raise the levels of enemies, giving you more resources for defeating them. Early on, it's a great way to grind, especially when it comes to the first Mastery Cave. The Delivery Facility lets you send back a certain amount of items from your inventory to your base during a dungeon, making sure you won't lose them if you die. This is great for anything cluttering up your inventory that you don't want to just throw away, or any mod parts you find from an excavator that you may want to keep in use. The Space Police lets you set a certain amount of equipment equipment builds that you can call in during a dungeon. So if you're low on equipment or just want to save your strong stuff for later, you can store it here and call it in whenever you want. And then there's the Tiger's Den. This is instrumental to strengthening your employees, so it's as good a time as any to go over that. You remember Innocents from Disgaea? Employees are Z.H.P's version of those. It even calls them Innocents when they're first introduced. And now you can forget about that, these are completely different. These employees make or break your facilities. You can recruit new ones by randomly finding and defeating them in mastery caves, and they'll have this check over their head. Without an employee stationed on a certain position in a facility, you won't be able to use whatever function that position serves. Their strength scales with whatever the strength of other enemies in that dungeon are, so the deeper you go, the stronger the employees you find. The employees have stats like any other normal unit, which are important for their survival in the caravan, so it really only matters for the ones you want there.
Excavator.
Employees you have stationed in a facility will naturally get stronger as you climb dungeons. You can think of it as them traveling with you and also gaining experience, except their actual level doesn't change, but their stats sure do. This is not what affects the usefulness of the facility itself though, this just makes them able to survive in the caravan. To actually boost the facilities, please refer to this other set of completely unrelated stats unique to employees. A set of 6 stats that directly correspond to specific facilities and determine their effectiveness. Facilities are affected by the total of both employees' stats. Each facility's usefulness depends on either 1 or 2 of these stats, and those same stats for the employees stationed there will increase over time by completing a certain amount of dungeon floors. Here's the full breakdown of which stat each facility uses, courtesy of our good friends Arugas. Only the stats of employees actually stationed in facilities increase. For example, employees in the blacksmith will have their smithing stat increased and nothing else. Here's the thing though, how many floors you need to clear to increase a stat depends on A, the current value of the stat itself, and B, whether the facility is based on 1 stat or 2. The double stat facilities effectively raise their respective stats at half the pace. And those dungeon floors must be cleared all at once, not cumulatively. So if it would take 30 floors to increase a given stat, you have to clear 30 floors in one go before returning to the hub to get the increase. If it would normally take 15, then clearing 30 would raise it by 2. There's a nifty formula to figure out how many floors you need for a stat increase. To break this down, all it means is that whatever floor you escape at is taken as a percentage, which is then applied to the current value of the stat. If the resulting number is 1, then the stat raises by 1. Anything less and it won't raise at all, and you'll need to redo all those floors. But again, it can stack, so if the resulting number is 2, well then by all means the stat will raise by 2. But for double stat facilities, the floor you escape on is taken at half the percentage, which is why I say it takes twice as long to raise them. This means though that the higher the stat is, the less floors it takes to increase, leading to exponential growth. It may seem like a super slow start, but it won't be for long, and all the default employees you start with already have 5 of each stat, which does still take 20 floors to increase by 1, but given that the first mastery cave has 60 floors alone, it won't take very long to really get the ball rolling. This all wraps back around to the Tiger's Den. The one sole function of the den is to raise your employees' stats. Any employees placed in this facility will have not just a select 1 or 2, but all of their stats grow in the same way they would in a normal facility, as if it was a single stat facility. Basically, keep some employees in here while grinding mastery dungeons or something, and their employee stats will get very high. Now, that isn't even to touch on the actual boost your facilities get by increasing these stats. A facility can be boosted to a level of 9, based on every multiple of 10 that the total stats of the employees reach. So for the blacksmith, when the smithing stat of both employees combine to 20, the blacksmith will be at level 2, and so on until at a combined stat of 90 when it's level 9. These thresholds are the same for single stat and double stat facilities, but in the case of double stat ones, both stats need to be at the required threshold to bring the facility to that level. The effect of this varies from facility to facility, but in general it just means being able to use them more times. At a level of 9, for the blacksmith, you can call in 9 repairs during a dungeon. For deliveries, you can call in 9 separate deliveries for 4 items each in a dungeon. For the home, you can call in 9 food items in a dungeon. For the caravan, you can set 9 separate dungeon floors for it to stop at. For the church, it means plus 9 levels of difficulty. For the space police, it means 9 separate equipment builds you can call in. You get the gist. Honestly, it takes a while to find employees with higher stats than the ones you start out with by default, so mostly you're just fine with leaving them as is while you power level deep in mastery caves. Since the stats that increase in each facility are the ones that actually matter for that facility, just leaving them there will automatically strengthen the facility. Even their normal stats will increase just fine. Even if they're dying in the caravan, they'll still be getting stronger, and eventually they'll be able to survive just fine. Your main concern is really the excavator, which I would recommend replacing with a stronger employee should you find one in a mastery cave. If you do want to shuffle employees around or replace them for ones you find in mastery caves, the Tiger's Den is your go-to for raising their employee stats to make them flexible. As you can tell, there is a lot going on behind the scenes that the game doesn't really tell you in terms of how to use these mechanics. But now that we have covered facilities and employees, we can start talking about the actual content of the game. The main story is split into 10 chapters. For the most part, they're all one 10-floor dungeon with a boss at the end, with a few exceptions that are split into two 5-floor dungeons with a boss at the end of the second. Now, these boss fights tend to be some of my least favorite kinds of designs, aka puzzle bosses. Just what I love in my RPGs. Not all of them, but most of them, and they can be a real pain in the ass when you don't quite understand what to do. Not exactly what you want after 10 floors of misery that you'll probably have to do all over again if you die. I think these are meant to be pretty self-explanatory, but the problem is that they're not. So I'll run through the strategies for all the puzzle-ish ones. In Chapter 2, you need to pull all 3 of the levers to reverse the conveyor belt, then throw a box onto this middle one to use as a stepping stone. In Chapter 4, get these gargoyles out of the way to free the lasers, then position and rotate the mirrors so both lasers shoot into this big mirror in the back to get the barrier down. Chapter 6's boss can go to hell. I mean, it comes in multiple phases that have to happen by way of a damage cap in each. In all of them, you need to first rotate the catapult by hitting it so that it faces towards the train. Make sure you're out of the path of rotation or it won't move. Then you need to catch one of these purple crystals that it sends down by standing on one of the shadows that appear during the warning signal. Throw the ball onto the catapult to launch it at the train, and the fight will progress as long as you keep doing that. In Chapter 7, you need to throw these rocks into the nostrils of the dinosaur. A few turns after both nostrils are plugged up, it'll open its mouth, and you'll have a few more turns to attack it before it blows you away. It'll also blow you away normally if you get too close before plugging at least one of the nostrils. In Chapter 8, the boss will occasionally suck up everything in front of it, including you. If you're out of its way though, it'll suck up an enemy or a pillar instead if there are any there. Sucking up 3 things that aren't you will make it go to sleep and you can attack it then. Chapter 9 is an annoying ass ice puzzle where my best recommendation is to just clear out the enemies because they will get in your way. You can throw these snowballs to manipulate your path a little bit and it really is straightforward, just extremely annoying. Chapter 10's boss, while not a puzzle boss, is the final boss and may look very intimidating. Personally, I used an arm weapon with auto charge, which lets you charge up a special you have casted by moving around up to plus 99% more damage. A Prinny Jet, which lets you charge the same way for a 99% damage reduction for the next attack you receive, along with a healthy dose of power leveling and boosting equipment mods on the Shadowgram. If you want more damage, you can also try using the Centaur body with Hungry Soul instead of the Prinny Jet. The energy cost for specials is used when you first lock them in or cast them, so you can safely expend your energy and still activate one for another 99% damage boost at 0 energy. Honestly, you might not even need any of this though if you just use Unlosing speed. But I may or may not hear you ask, how do you power level so much? The story dungeons just aren't cutting it. And you'd be asking the right question, my friend. The story dungeons are dog shit. Luckily, in the middle of Chapter 4, you automatically unlock your very first Mastery Cave, the first of 4 long dungeons that make up almost the entirety of post-game content. Each Mastery Cave is unlocked by getting at least halfway into the cave before it. The first Mastery Cave is the Beginner's Cave, which has 60 floors. The next one is the Mid Cave with 100 floors, unlocked by reaching floor 30 of the Beginner Cave. After that is the Veteran Cave with 150 floors, unlocked by reaching floor 50 in the Mid Cave, and finally there's the Absolute Hero Mastery Cave, with a whopping 200 floors from reaching floor 75 in the Veteran Cave. Even if you get to the point where you're clearing the Beginner Mastery Cave with ease, don't get too confident. Remember how I said the higher ranks of enemies are stronger with more base stats? You really feel it. The higher Mastery Caves, despite still starting with level 1 or 2 enemies, have a noticeable enemy strength increase that will screw you over if you're not prepared. The only other dungeon in the game besides these 4 Mastery Caves is the NIS Dungeon. Yeah, they literally just named it after themselves. The NIS Dungeon acts as your Grinder's Paradise Dungeon, so you're going to want to unlock this as soon as possible. And you can unlock it pretty soon, so let me tell you how. There are a set of 13 unique greeting cards that can only be gotten from the Excavator. In the original PSP release of the game, each of these cards would let you unlock a Dengeki dungeon, and there were 16 of them. Gathering all 16 cards and then completing all 16 Dengeki dungeons would then unlock the final NIS dungeon. However, in the modern versions without the Dengeki dungeons, that whole step of completing those dungeons is just skipped, and instead gathering all 13 of these cards will just unlock the NIS dungeon. Thankfully, you can find these on very low floors. I was able to find one as early as floor 5, so that was my minimum floor to reach before I started save scumming for them. You can find cards 1 through 5 in the beginner's cave, 6 through 9 in mid, and 10 through 13 in veteran, so this does require you to at least unlock veteran dungeon. Just set your caravan to the first 9 floors so you can keep saving at each floor, and so that you can start save scumming for cards. Once you find all 13 greeting cards, simply use them all from your inventory, but that alone won't work immediately. You have to go clear a random dungeon. Using all the cards is supposed to give you a new card called an invitation, but what actually triggers that is the stage clear screen for some reason. So the next time you clear a dungeon, you'll get the invitation. Just do the first story dungeon or something. Using the invitation will then unlock the NIS dungeon. The NIS dungeon is like the Cave of Ordeals of Z.H.P, except with practically zero barrier of entry outside the greeting cards. That is to say, it doesn't matter how weak you are, because the NIS dungeon has only 10 floors with simple layouts, and every single enemy in this dungeon is a metal cactus. You may have seen one of these in chapter 2, they can spawn there occasionally, but these enemies will never attack you. All they do is run, so the real challenge is actually just catching them and hitting them in the first place. These enemies only take 1 damage from anything, but this dungeon has a gimmick to it. Every non-lethal attack an enemy receives will make it split in 2, each with half the health the original had. Furthermore, these enemies don't even give you experience, they straight up give you levels, based on the level you already are, until you're gaining 100 levels from each metal cactus killed. Again, Grinder's Paradise. You will have metal cacti all over the place. The most effective way to use this dungeon is on difficulty +9 with the Church, since the cacti having more health will make them last longer and make more copies of themselves. At normal difficulty, they only have 5 health, so you can't get much use out of them. The trick here is to blockade some metal cacti in a room by placing objects at the entrances. Make sure to leave exactly 1 tile of pathway to herd the cactus into. If there are no free spaces around a cactus, it simply just won't duplicate, so this ensures no other cacti will block it in. The metal cacti run from you 2 spaces at a time, and they do not like being directly in front of you whatsoever. If there's a straight path between you and a metal cactus, even if you're really far away from it, it will move to your side again. But if there's a neat little cubby hole for it to go into and you're far enough away from it, it'll go in there, because yada yada, some AI coding behavior, who cares, it's exploitable. So get far away, move parallel to the cacti, and one will surely slip into the hole you've carved. Then it's just a matter of hitting it with a long-ranged weapon, very preferably spears, because they deteriorate much slower than something like guns. Make sure to bring plenty of spears and plenty of food, or rely on the blacksmith and home facilities. It won't take terribly long to get to level 9,999, the max you can get in a dungeon, and then you can just escape with a caravan. Note that your base stats cap at +200 at 70,000 total levels. There is literally no benefit to total level past that. And the boss of this dungeon is really weak, so after you've grinded, might as well clear it. There's a nice achievement for it, and you get a costume, which there's also an achievement for. Happy grinding! Either before or after your NIS dungeon excursions, you can start strengthening your base stats in other ways, namely equipment. The easiest bang for your buck equipment to get is the G-Darkdeath Evilman set, since it raises pretty much all of your stats significantly. This requires the regular Darkdeath Evilman set, which you can steal from him in his chapter 10 boss fight. You'll need a paw arm for this, which has a certain % chance to steal depending on what orientation you're facing the boss in, front versus side versus back, with the back being the most likely. If you're at +200 base stats from total levels, you should be able to survive just fine, especially if you use Unlosing Speed to get a ton of steal attempts at once. To convert the Darkdeath set into the G-Darkdeath set, which is even stronger, you need to make use of special rooms you can find in dungeons called springs. You can find these very often in the mid-hero mastery cave. If you throw a Darkdeath piece into the spring, there's a chance it comes back out as the G-Darkdeath version. Notice I said chance. The alternative... Fuck you. You might just actually lose it forever, and the only way to get another is by starting a new cycle and stealing it from Darkdeath again. But who the hell is gonna do that? Just put a caravan every few floors so you can reload saves from them if this happens. Once you have this full G-Darkdeath set and a nifty little achievement, you can break your stats in half. It's time to return to synthesis. The ticket to boosting your stats through equipment, counterintuitively, is not the stat percentages, it's the condition percentage. This is what directly affects the stat percentage boosts. So for a G-Darkdeath piece, if the SAT stat has a default of 20%, and the condition is the max 694%, 20% times 6.94 comes out to a 138% SAT boost. Now, I think they slightly changed how condition is calculated in the ports. See, in the original PSP version, at least according to this guide, the amount the condition increases when you perform synthesis is just by whatever the base item's rank is, unless the non-base item has synth levels. In that case, it would take that item's rank, which we'll call the synth item, and multiplies it by the levels it already has. However, in this version, it works the same way, but no matter what I do, it always uses the synth item's information, never the base items. Which is fine, we would have had to use that calculation anyway, because the G-Darkdeath set is not actually rank 6, it's rank 1. Now, the G-Darkdeath set is a special set, so it's not subject to the +9 synth level max like other rank 1 equipment. It can get to 99 synth level, so if you do have a rank 6 99 synth level item and synthesize that into a G-Darkdeath piece, it'll come out to 694% condition. The problem then is getting rank 6 equipment. I'll go over where to get some, but while we're already on the subject of synthesis, here's what to do when you do have your rank 6 equipment. For each G-Darkdeath piece you want to synthesize, you'll need a corresponding rank 6 equipment piece since you can only synthesize with items of the same type. So a rank 6 head to synthesize into the G-Darkdeath head, and so on. Since the condition boost will be based on the non-base item, aka the max level rank 6 item you'll be synthesizing into the G-Darkdeath piece, you're not even going to want to touch the G-Darkdeath piece until the very end. All it takes is synthing a bunch of fodder items into the rank 6 piece. That's it. All you care about is getting it to +99 synth level. However, for each equipment type, there are some good abilities you'll want to transfer along, and since you need to select what you want to keep every time you synthesize, just save those for last. It's easier if you synth a bunch of random items to max level first, and then use those to synth into the rank 6. It won't actually make a difference stat-wise, it just speeds up the process a bit. Once you have a +99 rank 6 equipment piece, it's just a matter of synthing that onto the G-Darkdeath piece, and voila, 694% condition. The head piece is the most pressing, simply because of Bushido. Bushido comes from the Feudal Mask and gives a +25% damage boost for frontal attacks. That's not too much, but each hero energy beam you have going into a headpiece booster mod adds an additional 100% to that, massively increasing your damage for frontal attacks. For an arm, you have auto charge from the Rocket Punch. Again, you can charge up a casted special attack for this for up to a 99% damage boost. For legs, there's Hungry Soul from the Centaur body. The less energy you have, the more damage you do, for +99% damage at 0 energy. When it comes to grinding fodder equipment for synthesis, you'll need a lot of it, and it really just comes down to picking it up in mastery caves and excavators. There's not a super quick way around it, unfortunately. And now for how to actually get rank 6 items. Normally, you can only find rank 6 enemies, and therefore rank 6 equipment, deep into the absolute hero mastery cave, so needless to say, it's a tad impractical. Luckily, there are a few special spots where you'll find rank 6 equipment before this. At the end of chapter 8, during the boss fight, there's an NPC you can't let die called Bean Noir, who will have a rank 6 skull equip that you can steal. All the other early rank 6 items are found in Mastery Cave bosses. If you have max total level stats in the G-Darkdeath equipment, the boss of the Beginner's Cave is a joke. I'll go over good ways to power level in each cave after we wrap up the equipment, but in reality, you'll be doing a lot at the same time here. Clearing a Mastery Cave, collecting some rank 6 equipment from the boss, using it to synthesize, changing your Shadowgram around accordingly, and then moving on to the next cave. So for now, we'll start with the Beginner's Cave and work our way forward. In the Beginner Cave boss, you can find rank 6 cloud enemies. These have a chance to drop two kinds of rank 6 equipment, an expansion part and a leg part. Again, nothing about these parts actually matters besides getting them to +99 synth level. I'd recommend using Unlosing Speed to basically kill all of them before they even have a chance to move, and reloading a save from a caravan right before the floor so you can keep retrying it until you get them to drop both items. When you get them, you can synthesize them up to +99, and then synthesize those into the G-Darkdeath expansion and leg parts for that max condition boost to send your stats soaring. The other half of this is the Shadowgram. For now, you'll still only have access to S-Plugs, the small version of equipment booster mods, so get some small booster mods from the nurse and place them on your Shadowgram. The max percent boost you can get from these is 50%, so it's not too hard to max a couple of these out with hero energy beams. Maybe even 3 of them if you're smart about it. Again, I highly recommend that one of these is a head booster. In the mid-cave boss, the rank 6 enemies have a chance to drop, well, basically anything besides a leg part, which you already have, so GG's. Problem is, I personally couldn't get them to drop anything. I don't know know if I just had dog shit luck or what, but this was not working out for me, and I ended up just moving on and relying on the parts I already had. The thing about the mid-hero cave though, is that the excavator starts selling M-plug mods, which are the medium equipment boosters, which have a new max of a 100% boost compared to the small plug's 50%. So while you're going through this dungeon, starting at about 450, since that's when the excavator starts selling the most stuff, start save scumming it and search for specific M-plugs, namely a head and whatever else you want to use. Then replace the S-plugs on your Shadowgram with the M-plugs, and you're good to go. M and L plugs each have a ton of iterations with different placement restrictions, in case you're confused about seeing multiple. That's totally not going to be a problem later. The enemies in the Veteran Cave boss have a chance to drop a rank 6 left arm part, and this I could get. Same deal, Unlosing speed. And the excavator in the Veteran Cave starts selling L plugs, so same deal. Hunt for specific L plugs, slap those bad boys onto your Shadowgram, and just squeeze any ounce of boost you can from them. The max is 255%, but it takes some real finessing to get multiple boosters there, and you don't really need that. You're better off leaving other mods on like storage space and life support, and living with a lower equipment boost. I had two around 200% each. This should be more than enough to tackle the absolute hero dungeon. But while we've gone over all the stat boosting, we've barely talked about the dungeons themselves. Each one has their own gimmicks and traps that affect how you can power level, or how much of a pain in the ass they are. But the important thing is power leveling. That and maintaining your energy. There's a special mod called Energy Saver that decreases energy used, but also decreases your attack power. I never used this, and I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it does half your energy consumption while cutting attack power by 25%. What I absolutely do recommend though is wearing an Appetite Engine headpiece. It comes with the passive No Pain No Gain, which again halves your energy consumption with no downsides. It also has the added benefit of limiting the health you lose per turn when you have 0 energy to only 1 HP, so it's great for survivability as well. Since you start at level 1 every time you enter a dungeon, your strength wildly depends on how many levels you can obtain in the dungeon. There are a few tactics you can use no matter which dungeon you're in, the most effective of which is related to the shop. You'll find shops randomly in floors, and the shopkeepers are super strong. As soon as you pick up an item, more shopkeepers will block all the exits until you pay for that item. Here's the thing though, you can use a special attack to just kill them. With good equipment and base stats, you'll have no problem with this, but that's not really what we're after. We're after what happens if you then exit the shop with at least one shopkeeper still alive. This makes you a filthy shoplifter, and not only will they come after you, but the entire floor will become flooded with extremely strong bodyguard dragons that will infinitely spawn in as long as you're on the floor, even when you kill the other shopkeepers. If you can survive these, it is quite literally an infinite source of experience where the only barrier to a high level is your own patience. This will be your best bet in the mid-hero and veteran hero dungeons, since there aren't really any specific gimmicks you can abuse to power level, but the new hero and absolute hero dungeons are a different story. In the new hero dungeon, there's a healthy chance for these mirrors to spawn in. These mirrors duplicate any enemy that walks directly in front of it. Each floor also has a healthy chance for zombie enemies to spawn on it. Their whole deal is that they never permanently die. They regenerate after 15 turns. You know what to do. If you get a floor with a mirror on it and at least one zombie, you're in business. Just get the zombie in front of the mirror, keep killing it, and it will infinitely duplicate more zombies. If you get in a position where the duplicated zombie just moves in front of the mirror again on the same pile as all the other zombies, you can just stay in one place and spam the attack button to keep killing zombies. The Absolute Hero Dungeon has a very similar tactic, but with a twist. Some floors have a fusion gimmick, where enemies adjacent to each other will automatically combine to form a higher leveled enemy. This can get real dangerous real fast. These floors will always be factory themed, and again, there's a chance that a zombie and a mirror will be on it. And if that happens, you can use the exact same tactic as the new hero dungeon, but with level 9,999 zombies this time. The problem is, A, being able to kill 9,999 enemies, which you should be able to do with some good G-Darkdeath equipment, but B, when a zombie duplicates with the mirror, the duplicate will always be on an adjacent panel if one is available, which means it'll just fuse right into the original one again. The only way to create and keep multiple zombies on the board with the mirror is if you create an environment where there aren't any adjacent spaces open, in which case one just spawns in on the nearest available. Then you can throw them onto the pile in front of the mirror, yada yada, spam attack. This takes a lot of luck because it highly depends on the mirror's spawn position. I was lucky enough to find one like this pretty early, but it could very well be that you won't ever find one like this, and you might have to live with just grinding one zombie. None of the earlier dungeons require much more elaboration. Yeah, they have some slightly different traps here and there, but all the floors are really straightforward. The Absolute Hero Dungeon, though, is a little bit of a different story. This dungeon is supposed to be a culmination of all the gimmicks that were in the Dengeki dungeons, except without the Dengeki dungeons, they all just seem to come out of fucking nowhere. Every floor has a gimmick, period, and some are much more dangerous than others, so here are the notable ones. Lava and ice floors. Both of these have safe islands of land separated by seas of either lava or ice that deal percent damage to you when you walk over it. This cannot be avoided. In lava floors, the whole map is revealed to you immediately, so you know at least where the safe land is, even if you still don't know where the stairs actually are. The ice floors are less kind. The map is not revealed to you, but there will be these remote controls scattered around that you can pick up and control a toy car with to safely scout the map. If the island you spawn on doesn't have one of those, you're shit out of luck. Time to go exploring. It's thanks to these floors that having food available to you is absolutely critical. You need to be able to heal. It's also thanks to these floors that I highly recommend you keep a cat ears headpiece with you. The passive on this reveals the whole map to you, so you can briefly put it on to get a lay of the land. The other dangerous floor is one where killing an enemy will generate an area around it with a random effect. One of these can be healing, but another can be 10% damage per turn. If you're not paying attention, this can screw you over hard. There are some other annoying ones, like one where normal attacks are forbidden, so it's a matter of picking up and throwing enemies or just relying on specials, both of which will tear into your energy. There's one trap you can activate in the mine floors that spawns in a spike ball that follows you, and if it hits you, it steals a random item you have equipped with no hope of ever getting it back. Good game if this takes a G-Darkdeath piece. Unequip everything immediately when this appears. Also pay attention to slumber cats and dwarves. Dwarves can make you randomly drop an equipped item when they hit you, and slumber cats can steal an item from your inventory with your only hope of getting it back being to kill it. Watch your items carefully. With good energy management, some patience and or luck and power level setups, and a good equipment set in Shadowgram, you should be able to get through these dungeons just fine. For reference, here are all the stats of all the bosses at the end of each dungeon at the lowest difficulty. Remember, unlosing speed is your best friend. Godspeed. If you're anything like me though, you won't just stop there, you're gonna gun for some achievements. Thankfully, most of them will come naturally through the course of getting through the caves, and there are only 19 to speak of besides the one for getting all the others. Don't worry though, there is still a few for you masochists out there. Lots you'll already have from endgame stuff. Unlock all the Shadowgram territory, synth equipment to plus 99, obtain the G-Darkdeath set, reach level 9999 in a dungeon, kill 100 metal cacti, clear the NIS dungeon, clear the Absolute Hero dungeon, defeat the final boss of the main story, and some miscellaneous ones. Die 50 times. Pretty self-explanatory, you can save scum this with backup saves. Defeat Darkdeath Evilman in the opening cutscene. In a new cycle, that is New Game Plus, with high enough stats, it's possible to actually beat Darkdeath in any of the scripted battles during the game. If you have good equipment on, this should never not work, and if you don't want to defeat him, just flee and you'll lose immediately. Beating him will always lead to an ending, so the only way to progress is to lose. Allow your home to fall in disrepair. Basically, keep going through dungeons until your deposited money at the home gets really low, and it'll pop. If you already have a ton of money in there, you can just start a new game and get it pretty quickly. Likewise, deposit 10 million. You'll be swimming in money once you hit the later mastery caves, so it'll come naturally. Use emergency morphing. This is from calling in an equipment set from the space police in a dungeon. Overcome a trauma. This is a mechanic that doesn't really matter, but it is a mechanic. When you get killed by an enemy, you'll have trauma from it. Just go kill an enemy of the same type and you'll overcome the trauma. It's supposed to give you more experience from killing that enemy or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. Unlock all costumes. There are 4 costumes in the game, and you'll get all of them from clearing the new, mid, and veteran hero caves as well as the NIS dungeon. These 4 costumes let you play as the respective boss characters of those dungeons, but there is a way to get a few of these early. You see this Prinny just hanging out at the bottom of the hub world? If you talk to him 10 times really fast, you'll just get the 3 costumes from the mastery caves right then and there. Seriously, set your text speed to the fastest setting, hold down circle to skip through it, and spam the button to keep talking to him, and you'll get a notice that you've unlocked the costumes. The remaining 4 achievements are gonna take a bit of work. Complete the character book. This is simply from killing one of every rank of every enemy. There are a few special enemies as well, but you'll undoubtedly have those. They're the special enemies guarding the stairs on every 10th floor of mastery caves, and there are only 4 types with no ranks. This should come naturally if you're vigilant about killing lots of enemies as you're going through the mastery caves. You'll encounter all 6 ranks of every enemy, but rank 6s don't start appearing until late into the Absolute Cave, so you'll really need to keep your eyes peeled. You'll notice a sudden shift. Each enemy type has a specific floor where suddenly all the enemies you see of that type will be of the next rank up. Some of them don't turn into rank 6s until the last 20 floors or so of the Absolute Dungeon or even later. You can save in a caravan and exit it to check your character book before reloading to keep better track of which enemies you still need. Purchase all tunes from the music store. Not nearly as straightforward as it sounds. Songs will be unlocked for purchase here once you've heard them in the game once. If you've completed some mastery caves, every single song will be available, except a select set of them. The default vocal track that plays in Mastery Caves is a medley of a bunch of different remixes. The medley has its own entry, but all the individual remixes do too. To unlock the remixes, you have to force them to play by wearing a very specific set of equipment, all of which is outlined here thanks to Zarugas. These are pretty strict. I was able to get one or two of these to work without one of the pieces since I didn't have them at the time, but for the most part, all of these pieces are required. If you wear one of these sets in a Mastery Cave, the corresponding remix will play and then will be available to buy in the shop. Note that for the Galaxy Magical Girl set, the Lucilia gloves don't exist in the modern ports because they were Dengeki Dungeon exclusives, so with some experimenting, I was able to get the song with ice staves instead. Complete the item book. This is by far one of the most pain in the ass achievements. This does not require you to get every rank of every item, thank God, but it does require at least one of each, leaving no question marks to be found in the item records. For weapons and equipment, there really aren't that many variations, and if you've gotten far enough into the game, you'll almost definitely have all of them by now. There are just a few notable ones you can only get in specific places. Of course, the Darkdeath and G-Darkdeath Evilman sets, but there are also a few pieces you get from defeating the Absolute Hero Dungeon boss. You don't have to steal it or anything. In fact, you can't. You'll get them automatically after clearing the dungeon. Specifically, there's a head part, a leg part, and an expansion part. For all other items, look for the new sign. Since anything that's not weapon or equipment only comes in one rank, you'll know that if you see new, they really are new and you need to get them. Among all these items are healing items. Only healing items up to potions can be bought from the shop, but there are stronger ones as well that can be found in later Mastery Caves. You'll likely just come across these naturally. For food, again, these will come naturally, but notably there are 3 types you can call in from home. The 5% meat from a disrepaired home, the normal 50% meat, and the 100% meat that comes when you have at least 10 million WP deposited into the home. All of these are wholly unique. There are your ailment giving and support items, your ailment healing items, and your stat boosters that are all extremely common. Then there's rare metals. These are used for synthesis, but I didn't really talk about them since it's better to use normal items. But there are many different colors of these you can find in higher Mastery Caves, and you need them all. Then there's your greeting cards. Simple enough, right? Except there's one more category, the mods category. I mentioned before that almost all of these can be found pretty much anywhere. It was only M plugs and L plugs that only show up later. Welcome to M plug and L plug grinding. When it comes to M and L plugs, every single equipment piece has 7 different versions with different placement restrictions. 7 versions of 5 pieces of equipment for 2 mod types comes out to 70 M and L plug mods in total, 35 of each. L plugs don't show up until the Veteran Cave, and even there, it's not really until floor 50 where you'll have the most luck with them, i.e. the excavator sells 3 mod parts. So what I ended up doing was setting a caravan at floors 51 through 59, climbing all the way up, save scumming each excavator for a new mod, rinse and repeat. Do this until you have all the mod parts, and the achievement will pop. The very last achievement isn't nearly as difficult, but it is much more time consuming. You'll already have an idea of about how long it takes you to reach level 9,999 in the NIS Dungeon from when you probably grinded it for total levels before, but how about keeping that up until 999,000 total level? There's no way around it. It is pure mindless grinding in the NIS Dungeon to hit that sweet total level cap. And once you've finally reached it, you've done it. You have 100%ed Z.H.P, the Unlosing Ranger versus Darkdeath Evilman. Phew, I never want to play another Mystery Dungeon game for as long as I live. For real though, I love Z.H.P. For as tedious as the later dungeons get, it was such a unique experience with a fantastic story and some pretty satisfying stat manipulation. I hope you enjoyed this crazy ride, and if you were trying to 100% this for yourself, I hope it helped in some way. If any of that applies, consider subscribing and all that good YouTube stuff. I will continue to suffer through more NIS games in the future, and whatever the hell else I'm drawn towards. I've been Mags, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.